Hello and welcome. My name is Colby Van Camp.
And my name is Jesse Kaiser. Welcome to our podcast, Musically Inclined.
Musically Inclined is a program all about exploring music and the vast and interesting topics that surround it.
Whether that be discussing composing, music software, music history, or interviewing professionals, we've got you covered.
You can find us and stream us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and wherever podcasts are found.
Special thanks to our podcast host program, Zencaster and Libsyn, for helping us make this happen. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Welcome to Musically Inclined. I'm Jesse Kaiser.
And I am Colby Van Camp, and tonight we have a pretty exciting episode for you. Exciting. I say that with air quotes. No, it's truly, I'm just messing around with you. It is truly an interesting episode. I think interesting is a better descriptor of
We're
tonight's
bashing our own show.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? We're the only people on the planet who get to bash our own show.
True.
So that's I'm exercising that constitutional right I have to.
So for all you haters out there.
For all you haters out there, you're not allowed to, but we can. We can. So tonight we are going to be talking all about notation softwares and how that works for us as composers, optimizing your workflow, which software is best, plugins, all sorts of crazy stuff we have lined up for you this evening. But the first thing that we need to talk about is Composer's Corner. And in tonight's Composer's Corner, it's me. I'm first. I went last week, so now I am up this week. So I have been doing a lot of research into requiems, and I have been experimenting here and listening to a number of different requiems by a number of different composers in a number of different time periods. And while my Spotify is pulling up here so I can make sure that I've got this right. Yeah. So I've been listening to the Missa pro Fidelibus Defunctis, and that is a requiem. So the Missa for the faithfully departed, faithful dead. Fidelibus Defunctis. I just love saying that.
Yeah.
I love Latin. It's fantastic. But that is written by the Renaissance composer Pierre de la Rue.
Ooh,
And
love that guy.
It's very interesting stuff. He has a very interesting requiem here, and it was recorded by Ensemble Officium with Wilfred Rombach as their conductor, and it's great. It's really interesting. The chant's very fascinating, and I think LaRue just writes some really interesting stuff in general for Renaissance music. And it's a shorter requiem. A lot of these Renaissance requiems go on for like ever. They go on for forever and ever and ever, because there's a lot of text to set, and this one is not all that long. I especially like the Kyrie. I think it has a really interesting setting of the Kyrie, and yeah, definitely look that up with that ensemble. It has a really crazy like picture of art where it kind of has this thing that looks like the moon, but it's actually a tunnel into somewhere else. It's really weird looking. It's definitely strange, but listen to it because the music is not strange. It's very interesting indeed. All right, Jesse, you're up.
And Pierre de la Rue, he writes some good stuff. Right. So for me, this week I've been listening to the Violin Concerto of Igor Stravinsky. That's a name we all know as composers.
Very nice.
Now, this is a later work of Stravinsky, and one of the interesting things about Stravinsky is the many phases of his compositional life and all the styles he went through. This is him in the much latter part of his life, and what's interesting about this concerto and what draws me to it more so than other concerti is that Stravinsky really views the violin in this piece not so much as a solo instrument in the sense of like a lot of romantic repertoire where it's kind of like doing its own thing with just the orchestral accompaniment, but rather the violin is really integrated within the ensemble in a really unique way. And the reason why that draws me to this piece is because that's more of how I think about solo writing. When I write for solo instruments with ensemble, I really do try to think of the solo instrument as one with the rest of the group, not just as its own entity hanging out on top. So to see one of the old masters also going about this method of writing for a soloist is really inspiring, and and it's been teaching me a lot listening to this piece. And it's not something Stravinsky did intention did by accident. I meant to say by accident either, because he admits that he did this completely intentionally, and he admits that this concerto, as far as technicality is concerned, it's not a very difficult piece by um, comparison to all the big concerti out there. But that's just because he's really trying to make it a part of the group, which is something I respect and something that I try to model. So yeah, it's a really awesome piece, one I've learned a lot from so far in the week I've been listening to it. And yeah, definitely go check it out. You should listen to anything by Stravinsky, but especially this piece. Go check it out. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, and a lot of people know Stravinsky for the Rite of Spring
Yeah.
and the Firebird Suite and Petrushka and stuff like that. Um, and he has a lot of interesting music, but I can't say that I've heard his violin concerto before. So I'll definitely have to look that up
Yeah.
and give that a listen.
There is some Rite of Spring influence in the concerto too. So yeah, look for it.
Cool, cool. And I do
Yeah.
love me the Rite of Spring,
Yeah.
as controversial as that piece was. It did not create a riot the first time I heard it. Maybe a riot inside my brain, but that was about it. Um, so, okay, moving on to
All right.
tonight's topic. So, notation softwares. Okay, so the first thing that we need to break down for our non-musician friends who are listening, but also for maybe even some of our musician friends who are not composers, notation softwares. Jesse, just give me a general, like, notation softwares for dummies version of what a notation software is.
Right. So when you look at a piece of music, when you look at sheet music, it's all refined, it's all nice and computerized, it's looking really good, really clear to read. That doesn't happen magically. That happens through your notation software. It's one of your primary tools that you will have as a composer in the modern era. It's how you put your music down into published format, putting air quotes around that published format. And again, it is a very crucial tool that you will always be using. You will always be in your notation software. It just allows you to take your ideas and put them in a more refined space. So that's basically your SparkNotes version of what notation software is. But there is a lot of discussion surrounding notation software. Um, for example, which one should you use? There are various options to choose from. And this is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. It is a discussion that goes very deep in the community. And so that's why we want to talk about it today.
Yeah. So the first things that we kind of have written down in our Google Doc here is that we put down some keys for success for anybody who's looking to start using a notation software. So the first thing that you need to know is that you need to get in the reps. If you're an athlete and let's say you want to be able to throw the ball like Patrick Mahomes, well, there's a bunch of stuff that you need to be able to do, and there's hours of practice that need to go into it. Unless you're Patrick Mahomes himself, I highly doubt that you're able to just like step out there and chuck a football 70 yards. You got to go to the weight room. You got to work on your biceps. You got to work on your triceps. You got to work with a throwing coach to make sure that your throwing technique is good. You got to make sure that your arms are in condition. You got to make sure your legs are in condition. You got to work on your footwork. You've got to work on your accuracy. There's so many things that go into throwing a football. Well, that's the exact kind of thing that you have to do with a notation software. It's all about getting the reps in. So if you are serious about using notation softwares, you're going to end up spending hours of time just writing and experimenting and using the notation software that you have chosen. And then some of your biggest friends are going to be Google, YouTube, and Reddit, or a FAQ, like FAQ FAQ forum that is included with the notation software that you use. So that's kind of the first major key to success is putting in the reps, because if you just think you're going to show up, click into Sibelius, and you're just going to roll with it, well, you're
You're
going to
out of
be
luck.
in for a really frustrating time there. But it gets better. It gets better. You get better at it once you progress through the learning curve.
Mhm.
So yeah, Jesse, what else do we have here on this Google Doc?
All right. So The next thing we have here is talking about optimizing your workspace. What do you need with you? Do you use a laptop or a desktop? Instruments, MIDI, what it is that you use. Now, in the last podcast, we were talking about the importance of using paper and pencil and how that can be an advantage for many composers. And I would say that even though we're about to get into the nitty gritty of notation software, please do not discount the advantages of using a paper and pencil. Using a pencil gives you complete creative freedom,
Yeah.
and you can write down anything that you want. It can be this big or it can be this small, it can be this short or this long, it can be absolutely anything that you think of. And so I do want to say to not discount the advantages of using a piece of paper and a pencil. I have one set up right over there to the left of my desk in case I want to have a little bit more freedom. But apart from that, there are other tools that you will have to use, like the computer that you're running your software on, and maybe other things such as a keyboard or a violin, like I have over there. When I was writing my violin piece Elegy, I spent hours and hours just experimenting on the violin and making changes to the score by hand. So there are a lot of different tools that you're going to have with you, but your workspace is going to be completely unique to you. So take your time to really, look into yourself and think about what it is that you'll need. Personally, I have a little small MIDI controller in front of me that I use to, work out simple ideas and input notes into my notation software. I have a bigger controller over here for doing more piano-y stuff and doing improvisations. And I have my two violins over there if I ever need to play them. And I've got a mixer and studio monitors to get quality sound. But I also should mention that, I have been doing this for quite a while. So this is a setup that I've worked, up to over time. So, you know, don't be thinking that you need to get all this equipment right away. Your first priority, should probably be saving up to get to your computer if you don't have one yet.
Yeah.
So don't think you need to, get this set up right away. Again, this is something that I've built up to over the course of many years. So take it slow, go on your own journey. Um, but that's personally what I use. Colby, what do you use in your basic setup?
So my basic setup, it really changes, honestly. Everything I do is through a laptop. I have my MacBook. So my notation software is always portable. It's always coming with
Mhm.
me. Um, I do a lot of time driving. I spend a lot of time in the car because I have a number of gigs that are kind of far away from where I live. And so if I'm not driving, I usually have my computer out and I'm working on something. I'm editing
Mhm.
a score. I'm working on engraving. It's very rare that I will input ideas without a piano. I do have an electric keyboard, but it is kind of on its last leg after like 10 years of use. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to get myself a better MIDI keyboard that I can plug in. And it was always really buggy with connecting to my notation softwares in my computer. I had
Mhm.
difficulty running it in GarageBand, let alone in a notation software. So I just need to make an upgrade there. I don't have any speakers because I prefer to use headphones.
Mhm.
Um, I would much rather have my studio headphones and just sit here and experiment with that plugged into the headphone jack.
Mhm.
Um, but that's kind of what I use. I I I know how to use pencil and paper. I really don't use pencil and paper. I have pencil and paper, and I've actually
Mhm.
been trying to get into more pencil and paper oriented stuff. But it's pretty rare that I sit down and I sketch stuff out with pencil and paper because for me, it's
Mhm.
really obnoxious to have to write something down and then turn around and duplicate that in a notation
Yeah.
software. When if I'm proficient with the notation software, I'm just going to put it into the software. It just makes more
Right.
sense to me to put it into the software. But sometimes there are exceptions where it's just you need to be able to write something out, or you need to have the kinesthetic um, expression of your writing to really get that in. But now I have a pretty simple setup. Frankly, I
Mhm.
have more invested in microphones and equipment like that. I have a
Mhm.
really nice blue Yeti X microphone here that I use for our podcast. I use it in Zoom. I use it for a whole lot of stuff. I actually made a really decent recording of a friend of mine. His grandmother is going into hospice, and she asked to have him sing a sacred like worship piece, and he play his guitar. and so that she could listen to him, because he's a student here and she lives in Chicago, I believe. And I literally just plugged this into GarageBand, this little microphone that I have, set it up, and we made a really nice recording. A
Mhm.
little bit of mastering afterwards in the GarageBand itself. But other than
Mhm.
that, that's I have a pretty bare bones setup, and that's
Mhm.
fine because I need to be able to take it with me. My setup's very portable, which is exactly what I need it to be.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I roll.
Yeah. So you can see how different from the get go our setups are. And again, that goes to the point of, your setup's always going to be unique to you. I'm a bit more equipment heavy than Colby is, but that's perfectly okay because that's just how I work. But again, just figure out what it is that you need. But if we're talking about the bare necessities, one of those things as a composer is going to be your notation software. And this kind of takes us into the next point, which is making everything readily accessible. My MIDI controller right here is right in front of my hand, so I can reach it at all times. I got my controls for my mixer right here. My big piano is just off to the side of me. Everything is reachable. And so that's really important. And not to mention, all of my scores are also just off frame over there. So it's really important for me to have all of these resources available at all times so that I can just reach for it and it's there. Um, but I'll say, enough about all the, the particular things we have like mics and controllers. We'll talk about that in the next episode of the podcast.
Yeah.
But why don't we get into our topic for tonight, which is specifically notation software. So, Colby, why don't you take us in?
Yeah, so one of the keys to um, creating an experience in a notation software is what you are getting back from the notation software, the MIDI playback that is coming back to you as you input stuff, and then as you play it back. One of the great features about notation softwares is that you have live playbacks of what you've written. They might not be incredible,
Mm-hmm.
but you have a playback. It won't recognize retards very well, or accelerandos are usually crazy, and dynamics
Yeah.
go from really soft to really freaking loud really
Yeah.
quickly, and there's just you can just see like the velocity going and dialing all the way up
Yeah.
from 1 to 127 and
Right.
automatically. But something that's very important are plugins. And so
Mm-hmm.
plugins are kind of third party sound libraries that you're able to buy. And it can be for literally anything. If you're looking for a synth, then you can go find that plugin. If you're looking for a choir, there are choral plugins. If you want a piano, there are piano plugins. There's all sorts of crazy stuff. And so we actually have my top pick for a plugin that I personally own, and then the plugin that I'm dying to try, and Jesse has the same thing. And my top pick is I have the East West Symphonic Choir's choral library, and something that's really unique about this particular choral library is that it comes with a text builder. So it's really finicky to use. I wish it was a little bit more streamlined because it doesn't fit normal English or IPA. So you kind of have to like figure out different kinds of ways to write in the text building, but it actually sings words back at you, which
Mm-hmm.
is really interesting. And if you're able to figure out how to do it correctly, which I have yet to figure out how to do correctly, you can
Mm-hmm.
actually line up the words in the playback so that if you want to export your playback from your notation software as like an MP3 file to send off to a competition or something, then it'll actually like sing the words, which is really cool if you're a choral composer like I am. And the plugin that I'm dying to try. So we always talk about him every episode. It's kind of funny. I think it's going to be like the running joke of the episode. But Eric Whitaker, our our
Our
patron
boy.
saint, yeah, our patron saint of composition, Eric Whitaker. He recently, and I mean recently, collaborated with a British software company called Spitfire Audio, and he created the Eric Whitaker Singers plugin. And oh my gosh, it's glorious. And they
Mhm.
sound exactly like the Eric Whitaker Singers because it is the Eric Whitaker Singers. They sampled them singing a bunch of different pitches, and then it's a plugin that you use. And if it wasn't like $400 and
Right.
I have a honeymoon to pay for, then I would just buy it. I would just straight up buy it.
Mhm.
But I can't at the moment. I'm saving up for it. But that is the plugin that I'm dying to use. It's going to be
Mhm.
really interesting to use that in my
Right.
choral scores.
Yeah. Now, before I mention my plugins that I want to talk about, so far we've been talking about plugins that cost money, but I should mention that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of free plugins out there. You can literally Google free plugins and you will stumble upon so many free plugins, a lot of which sound great. I have a lot of free plugins of myself. They sound incredible of myself.
For
um,
yourself.
but yeah, for myself, I guess. Yeah. And they sound incredible.
You're
So you can,
sampling yourself. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
So
That
you
just
can,
cracks me up.
so you can get a lot of good plugins for free. So definitely do a lot of research and have a see at what you can find. But my top pick for a plugin is one that costs money. It costs, I think, $200, and it is Piano Tech by Modart, I believe is how you pronounce it, Modartt. And the plugin is called Piano Tech. It is a incredibly powerful piano plugin with many instruments and complete control over aspects such as effects tuning and, you know, other aspects such as, how hard the hammer strikes. You can get really specific with it. This is actually a plugin that I introduced to Kolby so he can speak for its greatness. But it's really, they really have packed a really just powerful plugin into a really pretty digestible interface. And they have a really, realistic Steinway, emulation, which I use all the time for playback in my piano parts and piano pieces and all that good type of stuff. Ever since I bought it about a year ago, I've been using it every single day, and it's really just an amazing plugin to use. So go check out that one and Modart. They make a lot of great stuff. There's a lot of different instruments you can choose from. There are harpsichords, there are harps, there are electric pianos. There's all kinds of stuff that you can choose from.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'd just like to say real quick that there's a bunch of different versions of Piano Tech, and Jesse and I use Piano Tech 6. So,
mhm.
and that's PIANOTEQ, not like tech, like technology. So Piano Tech 6, and the Steinway model that we use is the Model D, which I
Okay.
believe is the Concert Grand.
Yeah, I've
Um,
actually since upgraded to Piano Tech 7, but yeah,
oh,
but just go
well, I
for
use 6, so
yeah, but just go for just check out the Modart website again. That's Modartt. Just go check it out, and I'm sure you won't be disappointed. So now, I won't be talking about the plugin that I'm dying to try because I've already tried this plugin, but I will talk about it as an interesting new find, and that is a plugin called Vital by Matt Tidal. That's Matt Tytel. Now, this is a wavetable synthesizer. So this is a plugin that has very different uses than the ones we've talked about so far, which are mainly, emulations of acoustic instruments or voices or what have you. Um, but the interesting thing about this synthesizer is, first of all, it's completely free, which is amazing because it's a very powerful synthesizer. And it's one that gives you complete control over the sounds that you make. So you can start with literally a sine wave, which is the most basic sound, and you can craft any kind of sound you want. Now, how does this apply to me as a composer if I'm writing concert music? Well, I actually will use wavetable synthesizers a lot if I'm writing choral music for choral playback because for a lot of choral music, I'll use, a piano for playback, just like how I'll figure out choral pieces on the piano a lot sometimes. But the bad thing about the piano when it comes to choral music is, one big thing is the attack. You don't get that with a choir really. And, so there are certain, less realistic things when it comes to figuring it out on the piano. But the advantage to using, a synthesizer, especially when you have something like a formant, which is basically a vocal cord emulation, then you can really craft a sound that's very choral, and therefore you can really kind of get a more realistic um, playback of what that might sound like. Now, again, it's nothing to be relied on, but it is something that can help get you there when you're trying to get into that sound world. So it's something that I like to do. And what's cool about this plugin, as opposed to a lot of other plugins where you need to run it through a digital audio workstation, this one has its very own interface. So you can just download it, click on it, and it'll pull up. I think it's great. You should definitely check it out.
I'm definitely
So
gonna have to check that out because of how much choral writing that I do. I mean, I had the choral plugin, but I'm gonna have to check that out as well because it
yeah,
seems a little bit more straightforward than the East West symphonic choirs.
yeah. All right, so why don't we get into the moment we've all been waiting for, where we get into the specific notation software that is out there. Again, there are a good number to choose from. There are not as many, let's say, if like you were a visual artist, but there are still, a number of software decisions that you have. So why don't we start with Musescore? Colby, why don't you start us off with that?
Okay, so Musescore is a notation software that is free, which is why it is very appealing to a lot of people. I actually know a number of people, both amateurs and professionals, who use Musescore. Um, One, because it's like the major appeal is because it's free, and but the next thing is that it's actually pretty easy to use. It's pretty self-explanatory. If you know anything about writing music, then it's literally as simple as clicking and just kind of clicking around how you input notes. It's just a lot of clicking. I don't know a whole lot about what their MIDI is like. So if you're somebody that needs to plug in a keyboard into your computer and then you figure stuff out that way, I don't know how MuseScore handles MIDI. I'm assuming that it has a pretty basic MIDI driver interface that allow you to do something like that. But I can't speak for it for sure because I have it's been years since I've used MuseScore,
Mhm.
but they have new developments that are happening quickly, so it's a pro. But there are some cons to MuseScore. There are a lot of missing features. There are some compositional concepts that are difficult to recreate because the technology for it for MuseScore simply doesn't exist, and that's what you're going to get with a free program like MuseScore. So I think that MuseScore does exactly what it is advertised to do, and that is to be a gateway drug for composers into getting into notation softwares. I definitely think that if you're a beginner, if you're brand new to composing, or you're just kind of like, man, I'm a musician, but I've always kind of had an inclination to putting some music on a page, and I don't want to sit down with staff paper and a pencil because that's really time consuming. What's a program that I can use without breaking the bank? Well, go look at MuseScore. I think MuseScore
Right.
would be really beneficial for you to use. So the next program is actually, we have two programs that are very specific here because they're kind of the big boys on the block right now, Sibelius and Finale. And it works out really well because I was a Sibelius user and Jesse was a Finale user. And so Sibelius is next on our list. So I'm just going to kind of plow through that. So we put up some pros and some cons for each of our notation software. So I'm just going to read through these. So the pros for Sibelius, it's created by Avid. Avid is a music company that does a lot with technology in creating notation softwares and DAWs and all sorts of other things that are very beneficial for not just like concert music composers and people who need to notate stuff, but also for people who are looking for sort of like a garage band experience, or who are film composers or multimedia composers. That kind of stuff is really Avid friendly, and Sibelius, because of that, is very much able to be formatted into programs like Pro Tools. Pro Tools is right up there. It's created by Avid. Um, you have Media Tools by Avid, which is also sort of like Pro Tools, but it's more for like media composers, so more like film composers and stuff like that. You have Avid Scorch. It's kind of like the new thing that is right now, that they're pushing for iOS products. That is kind of like Fourscore. If you're somebody who uses an iPad to uh, keep a portable library of PDFs of music with you, you're probably using Fourscore. And Avid's trying to hop into that game because Fourscore definitely has the monopoly right now.
Oh
And
yeah.
Avid is trying to get into that game with Avid Scorch. But there are a lot of different products that Sibelius is compatible with because it is run through and created by Avid. In my opinion, it's easier to use than Finale, because I think that there are some pretty upfront developments of the notation tools. There's not a whole lot of time that you need to spend looking for how to get a lot of basic notations and expression markings and articulations and stuff on the page. It's all very clickable. kind of like one of the pros for Musescore. It's very much, there's a toolbar. It's right up there in the front and center. You're able to click on it. You have a little keyboard that's right there. And you're able to kind of experiment with stuff that way. Users who have spent a lot of time with the program are going to be able to quickly create scores and have everything right at their fingertips. And this is good because it cuts down on the time for learning, because all of the major notation aspects are either self-explanatory or are in the toolbar. And there's not a whole lot of things you're going to be needing to search for in the toolbar unless you're getting into some pretty advanced music. Obviously, I was trying to find some of that stuff because I was writing some pretty interesting extended techniques. Aleatoric music, an extended technique that we talked about in, I think it was like the pilot episode or maybe the first episode, that was all about, you just kind of left it up to chance to the singer. There's a very specific notation for that, and it's actually rather difficult to create. And it took me a while to figure out how to do that in Sibelius. But once I did, I was able to do it. But now there are some cons. So there are three primary versions of Sibelius. There's Sibelius First, which is free, and it only allows you to create simple scores. And like emphasis on simple, like one instrument inputting individual notes. It's pretty bad, honestly. Then Sibelius just has Sibelius, and you can have up to 16 instruments per score. And then here's where they get you. So Sibelius, when I first started using Sibelius, I just kind of bought it up front. They actually had a student version. I was able to buy the full version at a student price. They don't offer that anymore. And then they gouge you on a subscription basis, which is really obnoxious. It's so irritating. So $100 a year that you can either pay upfront once, or you can pay like $9.99 a month for a year, or you can pay just monthly at a time for like $12, $13, I think it is. But it's $100 upfront for a 1 year subscription that you have to renew every year. So if you use Sibelius for 30 years, well, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that you're throwing out of notation software over the years. And then there's Sibelius Ultimate, which just gets even more expensive. It's $200 upfront yearly for a full program with all of the bells and whistles and everything that you need to use. The built-in instrument library is garbage. Like, it just sucks. It's just terrible. That's literally the reason why I bought the East West Symphonic Choirs, is because I was like, the vocal MIDI playback is disgusting. So
I've
then
heard
I
it.
would change it. I would change it to strings, which was equally as disgusting. And then I would change it to clarinets, which was equally as disgusting. I was like, oh my gosh, this is just
Yeah.
terrible. So even the piano is bad. Like, it
Yeah.
literally sounds like GarageBand has a better piano library than
Yeah.
freaking Sibelius does. You have something you want to add, Jesse?
No, I was just going to say that no, I've heard the Sibelius playback sounds and they are absolutely, garbage. I've heard them in some of the scores that Colby has sent me throughout the years with playback, when he was only working with the Sibelius sounds, and they really do sound truly awful. So he's really not kidding around when he says they're bad. They're bad.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because I think Sibelius is a pretty decent program, and then they just kind of like skimped on or maybe they simped. I don't know, getting with the times. They simped on the instrument library because it's just garbage. It's just terrible.
Really bad.
So then to even like compound this problem, the third-party music plugin, the way that you do that, the way you interface that with Sibelius sucks. It's so bad. It takes so much time to figure out how to do it. Like, I'd had to do some major research to figure out how to use it effectively. It was just terrible. It's just bad. So it's a major F in the chat for Sibelius because it's really terrible. There are some engraving related actions that are difficult to learn and take a significant amount of time optimizing to your personal needs. And every notation software is going to have this con because there's a learning curve that's specific to the software, that's specific to the user. And it's just, so if you know what you're looking for and you can't find it, it's going to take a little bit of Googling, doing that Google, YouTube, Reddit, FAQ checklist that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. That's what you're going to need to be doing. Score creation can be rather buggy, and the application also tends to crash if you're working on large scores. Oh my gosh, working on large scores with multiple plugins, especially if you have multiple plugins. I can't tell you how irritating it'd be that I'm on a roll and I'm notating notes really fast, and all of a sudden it just crash. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah. There's kind of a meme going on right now in the community that goes Sibelius has crashed because it's because it's just one of the things about Sibelius. It just crashes. And even me, as I have never been a Sibelius user, it's still something that I know about just because it's become such a meme in the industry. So it's just like Sibelius has crashed.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because I was talking about notation softwares crashing with my composition teacher, and he said, could you imagine how enraged people would be if Microsoft Word crashed on the amount of bases, like
Oh
the
my
same time
gosh.
basis that Sibelius or Finale crashes on? And
Oh
I'd never had that
geez.
put into perspective like that. Just like, dang, like nobody would buy
That would
Microsoft.
that
It
would
would
that would
be terrible.
that would cause like a public outcry.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So they don't have a lot of major development that's going on. They're not working on a whole lot of stuff. And then so this is kind of like a funny note for me because this was so irritating in a personal experience, but I wrote in that you're boned if you accidentally close out the notation keyboard, because I accidentally did that once and it literally took me 4 hours of Googling to figure out how to turn it back on. And then once I figured it out, it was the stupidest thing. It was right there in front of me. I was like, are you kidding me? But I had to go through like 6 different click down keyboards to get to it. I was like, this is terrible. And then my
Yeah.
final con is that the help forums that are actually with Avid and Sibelius suck. They are convoluted. You're not going to find anything. You have a better chance of finding something on like 4chan than you do on a Sibelius help Reddit. Like,
Go to
it's just
4chan for
terrible.
Sibelius help.
It's just terrible. So anyway, those are my pros and cons for
Oh my
Sibelius.
gosh. Yeah. This is great. All right. Moving on to Finale. All right. So, now I will mention that, for our respective programs, Colby being Sibelius, me being Finale, we have both since moved on from these programs. So we are definitely not hesitant to talk absolute crap about both of these programs now. So I just want to, preface you with that, even though Colby has already just gone off on Sibelius.
I
But
mean, I talked absolute crap about Sibelius even when I was using it. So like I didn't, nothing changed. I just got a microphone in front of me. That's the difference.
yeah, no, with a lot of composers, they'll try to defend, vehemently the notation software that they use because it's the one they use and they don't want to look bad. But, that's why it's important to have these discussions, because the software you use is really important. But anyway, let's move on to Finale. So, Finale is Sibelius's direct competitor. It is the other big boy program that has been around for years and years. So let's talk about some pros. There are many different variations of Finale for various degrees of aptitude. So you got Finale Notepad and you got Finale Print Music. Those are the basic lesser versions of Finale apart from the full version. So when I was starting composing, the first notation software I ever used was Musescore, well before Musescore was the program it is today. And after I moved on from Musescore, I actually moved on to Finale Notepad, which, if you think about it, is actually a step down. But the reason why was because it was a Finale product, and because I knew Finale was, one of the big softwares that legit industry people use. Then I thought it was, a worthwhile transfer. So Notepad is very, very basic. You can only do so much in Finale Notepad. You can only do really basic things, notes, dynamics, that kind of stuff, basic articulations, and that's pretty much it. Print music, I didn't get that much experience with, but it's just basically giving you a little bit more, permission than Notepad does. But obviously, what you're really looking at is the full version of Finale. So I'm really just going to skim past those because, they're basically just lesser versions of, the parent program.
Sure. Yeah,
Um,
we're editing through the parental security measures here
right,
for
exactly.
for the Finale notation software.
Yeah. All right. So the next pro, the Geriton Instruments. This is the kind of instrument library that's offered by Make Music, who are the makers of Finale. Um, and these instruments are pretty decent, and they come with your purchase of Finale. They have a lot of different instruments for you to choose from, and some of them are pretty decent, and I found great pleasure in using them. So I think you would too if you were to give them a shot. So I think Geriton Instruments are worth shouting out there. The next pro is that, like Sibelius, I think this is a shared pro between them. Finale has been around for a very long time, and there is a very solid community that has been established with firm knowledge of the software. And what's interesting is that this can be both a pro and a con, because obviously there's a pro in the sense that there's such a firm community surrounding this software, because that means they're going to know the software inside and out.
Yeah.
But the reason it can also be a con is that um, there's also a lot of old code that's accumulated throughout the years, which can result in bugs, and it makes it very, very difficult for there to be any major developments. So it can kind of be a pro and a con for the same time. But the community that surrounds the software is really nice to have, because there's always somebody out there who will help you. All right, so now if we talk about some cons to Finale, there is absolutely no major development happening in Finale right now. It's a similar thing to Sibelius, and again, it's because it's old software. You know, there's going to be no major development happening with any of these programs. There never will be ever again, and that's just, partly uh, because that all this old code is accumulated throughout the years, but it's also because of that community I was talking about. Because they're so used to the software, any major changes to the software would cause a public outcry. So that's part of the reason that you're going to see no major development happening for Finale or Sibelius. And the last con that I have here is that you will have to learn a bunch of workarounds for functionality issues. This is guaranteed. There are all kinds of functionality issues in both Sibelius and Finale that you're going to have to find workarounds for. And part of the thing about the community is, you're going to be able to run into people who know these very intricate workarounds that you can get to achieve certain types of things that there just essentially is not any functionality for, which is a really big drawback for both of these softwares. But yeah, but apart from that, as next Finale user, I really don't have much more to say about it. I really wouldn't advise getting into Finale, honestly, because, with the options that are out there nowadays, you really don't have to. And
Yeah.
I do have to agree with Kolby in saying that it probably is true that Sibelius is an easier software to use, but I wouldn't advise you to be getting into Sibelius either, because the next software we're going to be talking about is the one that we both use now, and it is a software called Dorico. So, Kolby, why
Enter
don't you
the
talk to us about
well,
Dorico?
I was gonna say, enter the door bros. That's kind of like, talk about the meme of the industry that's going around right now, and
Oh
all
God, the
the
Dorico
and
bros are here.
yeah, that's like, oh no, here they come. It's like the fake mafia of
Right.
of notation softwares. So okay, there's some pros and there's some cons to Dorico. There's significantly more pros to Dorico than there are cons. And the first one is that it's a new kid on the block. So there are lots of major developments that are happening very quickly. And when I first got into this program, it's because Jesse had been using it for about 6 months to a year. And I believe that it was because he also said that the people that founded Dorico also worked for both Sibelius and Finale. So it was like both
Not
sides.
Finale. It was just the ex Sibelius team.
Oh, it was just the ex Sibelius team? Okay.
Yeah.
So then, even so, it was one group of people that were already intimately familiar with creating a notation software that came back and said, all right, we're going to make one better based off of the failures of the last one that we'd been working for. So that's kind of cool. It integrates really well with programs like, is that Cubase? Is that how you say that?
Yeah, Cubase.
Yeah. Okay. I've never used that before. So it integrates with programs like Cubase, and it has a very stiff competition to Sibelius right now,
Right.
in terms of the notation software that should be the go-to. Talk to us real fast what Cubase is, because I've never even heard of that.
So Cubase is basically the direct competitor to Pro Tools, and that's what makes it
Gotcha.
really dangerous for Sibelius. Now, I do want to talk a little bit more about the incident that led to the creation of Dorico really fast. So, as we mentioned, Dorico was created by ex Sibelius employees. These were actually employees from the main development team for Sibelius who were laid off to cut cost. And after they were basically disbanded, um, I don't remember exactly where in the UK that this team was based, but they basically laid off those workers. Avid did in order to start up a new development team in the Ukraine, but that one ended up failing. And by the time Avid tried to take all those workers back that they had laid off, they had already moved on to working on Dorico. So that was a really bad move for them. But so there is a really kind of unique motivation that goes behind the creation of this software. Um, but yeah, but going back talking about Cubase, it is the direct competitor to Pro Tools, so it does, since it has that similar, advantage of integration that Sibelius has, it really makes it a really tough competitor, and that's why Dorico is so dangerous. But
Nice.
let's move on to the next pro. And this is one that's personal to the both of us. Many longtime Sibelius and Finale users are making the switch to Dorico. And obviously, this is very much worth talking about since Dorico is Sibelius and Finale's competition. It's really important that a lot of those users, including Kolby and I, are making the switch. And, there are many great reasons to, as we'll start talking about. And the first one that I'll talk about is making parts. If you work on orchestral music and you have used either Sibelius or Finale, especially Finale, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the pain of making parts. It is the absolute worst thing in the world. I can, talk about my own experience of making parts with Finale where just, oh my gosh, you had to do all of, the manual adjustments yourself, and it would just export like the very same proportions from the score, so it's all just messed up, and everything's intersecting with each other, and it's like someone vomited on the page, and it's the worst thing ever.
It's an
But
engraving disaster, and
right,
Sibelius is the same way. It once you've exported your freaking parts, it's kind of like, all right, time to log in another hour and a half fixing the parts after you've just engraved the entire full score.
right,
So yeah, no,
yeah,
Sibelius is the same way,
and it's a huge time consumer, and as we all know, time is money, so it is a
especially in the music
really
industry.
right,
Especially in the
especially in the
music
music industry.
industry.
So it is a really big disadvantage when you have to deal with something like that. But Dorico has been doing a much better job at the part making process because parts are spaced and organized automatically, which saves you loads of time. I have never, ever had an easier time making parts than I have in Dorico. That was one of the main things that triggered me to make the switch because it was so much easier. Holy crap. And it was really a revelation for me. And not only are parts easy, but using plugins are easy too. We were just talking about plugins. Third party plugin use is very simple, with the exception of Note Performer. There is a bit of a weird thing going on with Note Performer. It's a unique one, but apart from that, using plugins could not be easier. They literally just pop up on this little drop down in play mode. If you're a Dorico user, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you can literally just select your plugin from there. It's so simple.
And it's crazy because in Sibelius, I don't know if the same thing is similar for how Finale was, but Sibelius, you had to go into like an actual plugin folder. You had to create a new plugin, then you had to download the plugin, then you had to insert the plugin by like channel into this stupid
Yeah,
plugin creator. Is just
yeah,
terrible. And then if you edited it wrong, it would like pre-save it, and then before it would let you edit it again, you had to literally close down Sibelius entirely and then relaunch it. It was the most irritating thing on the
yeah,
planet. And Dorico, literally, you have the plugin downloaded on your computer, it finds it for you. Like, it just knows where it is. And then you just open up the playback bar, and it's kind of like, oh, there it is, right there. You want Piano Tech 6? Great, bam. You want the symphonic choirs, which shows up as play in Dorico? There it is. Click, bam, and it's just plugged in right there. Super easy, super intuitive. And it's like man's best friend is Dorico when it comes to plugins, as
yeah,
far as that's concerned. Um,
absolutely.
so the next couple of pros are ones that I wrote, because Jesse spent a lot more time in the beginning with Dorico than I did. In the beginning there was Jesse and Dorico,
I was a pretty
but
early convert.
but then I came along at the recommendation of Jesse. I was kind of like, I don't know. But then I kind of decided to go
Yeah.
for it after he showed me some of the stuff. And
Took a while to convince him, but I got him there.
it's it was smart. Thank you for convincing me. But something that's excellent about Dorico is that their fact pages are incredible. They have an entire database of like easy to understand steps to get to pretty much whatever you're looking for. There's been a couple of things I've needed to do some pretty extended googling to understand, or rather DuckDuckGoing. I don't Google. I DuckDuckGo. So so that the government isn't spying on me, and so I don't have to pay for a VPN. So there we go, no DuckDuckGo around. I'm one step away from being like one of those weirdos who goes on tour, and I'm like two steps away from Google. So there's an insight, behind the scenes insight into what I think of the government. But anyway, I'm not a freak. Believe me, it's fine. But the fact pages are incredible. And then their Instagram account is fantastic. I can't tell you how many things I've learned just from watching the little info videos. They have like a new video that they post every Tuesday, and it's been incredible. And they have great stuff on their Instagram page that is definitely beneficial. Go check them out. It's literally like at Dorico, I believe. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
Their Instagram page rocks. There are some, in my opinion, it has the most optimal engraving features of all the programs discussed. And once it's learned, it's definitely the most intuitive to use. And it's excellent for designing extended techniques. So, like I said earlier, I do a lot of stuff with aleatoric music. Dorico is excellent for aleatoric music. It's pretty self-explanatory, and you're able to create boxes, different time signatures at once, which is something that would just you could kill yourself trying to do that with Sibelius or Finale, and you'd never be able to do it. And in Dorico,
Impossible.
it's
Like
literally as
literally
simple
impossible.
as holding like Alt as you hit Enter on the when you enter a time signature, and they'll just enter that one for that bar. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And then the properties panel is gloriously intuitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Dorico team has done a fantastic job in making a lot of new approaches to notation software. And there are some things that require a little bit of work, as does any software, but there are a lot of things that they have done amazingly well, and they should be commended for it. Kolby was talking about aleatoric music. When it comes to doing stuff in free time, Dorico is definitely the best software to do that in. So there are just so many great things about Dorico, and probably the most exciting thing about it is that it's still new, relatively speaking. So there are lots of developments happening all the time. Those guys are hard at work, making the software better and better and better, adding new features. And that is, I think, the nail in the coffin that has been making a lot of Finale and Sibelius users switch, because as we were talking about previously, Sibelius and Sibelius. I think I was trying to make a combination between Finale and Sibelius. Sibelius and Finale are both stagnant programs. They are not making any major developments, nor will they ever. It's not happening. But with Dorico, it absolutely is, because, as we mentioned, it's the new kid on the block. So there are all kinds of exciting developments, happening. With the latest big update when they came out with Dorico 3, holy crap, was it exciting, because there were so many amazing new features that just really made it so much more fun to work with, and made me more proud to be a convert. So because it made me feel like I was with the times. But no, there's just so much great stuff. But there are a few cons that we do need to talk about, because while Dorico, in our opinions, is an excellent piece of software, it's not a perfect software. No software is. It makes me sad. But let's talk about some cons, starting with Kolby. Take us away.
So it takes a significant amount of time to learn the upfront tools and notation quirks of Dorico, primarily because it is a new kid on the block, and because they've done such radically different stuff from Sibelius and Finale. So it's kind of not a con because it ties back into being a pro, but the learning curve up front is very significant. But then once you master that learning curve, especially Key commands are really irritating at first, but they make your life really simple. The program is really easy to use after you've mastered that, but it's getting over that hump. It took me a solid, and this is somebody who's familiar with notation softwares, is familiar with how to look for information about notation softwares. And I think I'm a pretty bright individual. So it wasn't like I was just some idiot who wanted to start using a notation software. I knew how to use it. And it still took me a solid year. And I'm still Googling stuff. I literally Googled something yesterday because I didn't know how to do it. And then enter the fact pages and Instagram page of Dorico because they had a bunch of great stuff. Like I said earlier, I was not skimming 4chan to try and find information on how to do stuff in
Yeah.
freaking Dorico like I was in Sibelius. It also needs a lot of RAM space. So if you have a computer that's not all that beefy, or you don't have a lot of RAM to begin with, you might want to consider upgrading your RAM, or it's going to be really
Yeah.
buggy
Yeah. It's a bit
because
power hungry.
it's just a big program. Um, and then do you just want to hit these final two cons?
Yeah, sure. So, figuring out how to effectively use the engrave toolbar is definitely a trial by fire, and it takes a lot of time, patience, and research. And I really do just want to talk about the learning curve briefly for a second because it's probably one of the most discussed things, if not the most discussed thing when it comes to, you know, people making the decision of whether or not they want to make the switch is, what's the learning curve like, because we're all working and it takes time to learn software, so everyone's asking the question, is it worth it? And I'm a person who's of the opinion that if you're going to be learning a software that's as powerful as Dorico, it's going to take some time. When you're learning any software that's worth your while, it's going to take some time, because if it's really powerful, there's going to be a lot of, complicated functionality that's just going to require you investing the time to learn. But I urge you to take that plunge, because I really do think that it's well worth it. I have had a much easier time, much more fun time working in Dorico than I ever had in Finale. And I think it really is a step forward in music notation. And so I really do encourage you, if you're asking yourself that question in your head, I do encourage you to take the plunge, because I do think it's worth it. But about the engraved toolbar, yes, Endorico is a very, advanced piece of work. It does take a lot of research, a lot of finicking around, just figuring it out. There's a lot of really specific things like master pages and tokens and stuff like that. That's really specific to Dorico. That can be really difficult to wrap your head around. But again, it's just one of those things that once you get it, you'll have it. And they really are, it's really, incredibly useful functionality. So it's definitely something that's going to be well worth your time. And then our last con that we have here is switching between the engraved tools and the actual notation tools can be kind of irritating when compared to Sibelius's click and drag notations. And this is one of the things that goes into just, the basic idea of how Dorico works. The main thing that separates Dorico from Finale and Sibelius, where Sibelius and Finale involve a lot of clicking with a mouse, Dorico is mainly used via the keyboard, the computer keyboard. Which personally, that's something that I really like, because I think it's much faster. But it's definitely something to get used to, because with the two biggest softwares, they're both a lot of clicky stuff going on. It can be something, to get used to. And again, that's just something you're going to have to learn. But I do think that using the keyboard as the main way of controlling the software, I do think is a step in the right direction, because again, it's a lot faster once you get the hang of it, because, clicking with a mouse is always going to take time, no matter how much, where everything is. And it's, you know, you may not think it's really time consuming, but those seconds add up, man. And if you
Yeah,
multiply
they
that by
do.
like a number of weeks, that's a lot of wasted time, believe it or not. So if you're just able to quickly type stuff on a keyboard, it does save you a lot of time.
Yeah. Cool. So then that's kind of completes our crash course on understanding Dorico. I highly recommend it. I know Jesse will too,
Mm.
because I think it's definitely the superior notation software out of all the ones that we've talked about so far. We also have, just real fast here, a couple of lesser known softwares. So there's Note Flight. There's a free and a paid version. It's essentially Musescore. A discount Musescore. I don't know if you get any more discounted than Musescore, but you do with Note Flight. And
Hmm.
it's excellent for beginners, but anyone who's interested in creating good scores with excellent engraving and notations should go with the more professional software. I would just recommend that up front. In fact, I try to
Yeah.
steer people away from Musescore. They're like, I think I'm going to be a composer. What software should I use? I'm like, don't start with Musescore. Like,
Yeah.
because it's just, again, it's another program you have to learn something new about. You have to relearn for Musescore. So I try to introduce people just directly into Dorico. That's going to
Yeah.
make that initial learning curve rather difficult for them. But
Yeah.
once they have it, then they can translate
Right.
what they've learned to pretty much any other notation
Yeah.
software.
Dorico is a piece of software that you could use for the rest of your life. I don't think the same can be said for Musescore. Now, I know there's a lot of debate over this because there has been a lot of major development happening with Musescore lately, but I still don't think it's there yet. So, I'm the person who's just of that opinion that Musescore just isn't there yet. So, I would advise you, if you're looking at a notation software, to just try to get into the big boy software straight away and, dive into the deep end and learn it, because the quicker you learn it, the better. And if you learn it well on the top software, you'll be unstoppable. So,
Yeah.
just take that time. Don't baby yourself. Again, I know that there's a lot of controversy surrounding the whole Musescore discussion, but again, I'm of the opinion that it's not quite there yet. So I would recommend just going straight in with Dorico. The last lesser known software we want to talk about, or not really talk about, because we both really don't know that much about it, but
I've
I
never
do
even heard
think,
of it.
right, but I do think it's one worth talking about because it's out there and a lot of people really enjoy it. It's a software called LilyPond. Again, we don't know much about it. It's a text-based music engraving tool, which means that instead of doing clicky stuff, you're typing out lines of code. Actually, it's really similar to a historical piece of software called Score, made by Leland Smith. It was the old standard back in the day. Some engravers at big publishing companies such as Boozy and Hawk still use it to this day because, even though the learning curve is tremendous, since it's basically a programming language, once you learned how to do it, you could lay out scores incredibly quickly. It's almost sickening. But Lily Pond is basically, cut from the same cloth as Score. Um, we urge you, if there are any composers out there among our audience that use Lily Pond, please do talk about it, because we don't know much about it. We've never really delved into it ourselves, but we would be really curious to hear more about it if you are a Lily Pond user or know anything about Lily Pond. But yeah, so those are the two lesser known softwares we want to talk about. But again, if we were to recommend a piece of notation software to you, for the both of us, it would probably be Dorico, because it is the most promising out of all the software, in our opinion. It's got a lot going for it. And I think we can both agree that it's probably the biggest step in the right direction that's happening right now.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. And speaking of good stuff, I want to give a shout out real fast to our social media. So if you would like to follow us on Instagram, you can at Musically Inclined PC. That is at Musically Inclined PC. That is on Instagram. If you'd like to follow Jesse and myself individually, I am at KG Van Camp, VANCAMP on Instagram. And if you want to follow Jesse, he recently just got back into the Instagram crowd after I harassed him into doing it. And I believe that he is, say it again. Well, it's like JesseKaiser.jpg. Isn't that what it
Yes,
is?
yes, you can find me on Instagram if you would like to follow me personally. Again, yes, Colby harassed me into getting back on Instagram, so I did it. You can find me at jessekaiser.jpg. Go ahead and follow me there.
Fantastic. We also have a YouTube page. You can look us up if you type into YouTube Musically Inclined, the podcast. You will be able to find us there. And then if you want to email us about a particular topic, we have not yet received an email about a topic, and I am dying to hear what you, the listeners, have to say. We have also been expanding. Again, I don't know if that is through VPNs or through actual unique listeners, but we have now expanded to Belgium, the UK, and let's see, there was one more. I think it was Indonesia, I think it was, on
Wow.
our worldwide map. So that very well could be a VPN, and somebody's just listening to us through a very protected network. But if they aren't, then hats off to those of you
Hey,
across the world who are
we like
listening
to
to
believe that
us.
there's an Indonesian out there listening to us, and we thank you. Thank you for
Yes, I,
listening.
I choose I choose to acknowledge that truth, even if it's not truth. So, anyway, yeah, if you'd like to email us to suggest a topic, please do so. You can do that by emailing us, and our email address is podcast.musicallyinclined@gmail.com. Again, that is podcast.musicallyinclined@gmail.com. So that is going to finish up today's episode of Notation Softwares. Next week, we are going to be talking about music creation gear, the basics. So we're going to be talking about microphones, MIDI instrument, DAWs, sound production, all sorts of other crazy stuff that are kind of on the technological side. In the very recent future, very near future, we have our first guest coming on the show, and a composer that I knew once upon a time when he was at Kansas State University when I was just a little tiny freshman. His name is Alex Joaquim, and he is currently living the big life as a composer in New York City, working on film scores, musicals, and all sorts of other great stuff. And he's going to be coming on the show here in a couple of weeks to talk to us about how to live in the big city, how to be sustainable, and how to write music that people want to listen to, and how to break into some of these more niche genres like musical theater and film scores. So, without further ado, thank you for listening to us tonight. Jesse, I'll let you sign us off here.
All right. Thanks for listening tonight. I'm Jesse Kaiser.
And I am Colby Van Camp. You have been listening to Musically Inclined.